No.
And I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Are you a fan of Scotch whiskey?
I have been known to imbibe from time to time.
Well,
yes.
Of course. Yes.
Hello and welcome to the Rose and Rockstar from Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast and the Marketing Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ian Truscott. I'm not a rockstar, but I am a CMO. It's Saturday the 10th of May, and in a moment I'll join my chum, Chief Troublemaker at 7th Bear, Robert Rose, in our virtual bar, the Rose and Rockstar, where he recommends one of his fabulous cocktails, and I pick his brains on a marketing topic that is top of mind for me. This week, over a classic tipple, we are stepping into the minefield that is controversial content. How edgy and different should we be? Based on a recent article we published on the Content Marketing Institute's blog, surprise, your most controversial content might be your weakest. But first, we need to pay the bar tab. I'll be back in a moment.
We'll be right back. After this word.
We'll be right back.
After this word.
Raise the rudder! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more to reach the professionals who are more likely to find your ad relevant. Plus, with 1 billion members on LinkedIn, that means you'll have access to 130 million decision makers and 10 million C-level executives. That's a lot of millions of the right people. Get started today and see how you can reach the right buyers with LinkedIn's enhanced targeting tools. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply.
Hilton brings you new ways to stay. With experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
Hello, my friend. Welcome to the bar.
Thank you very much, mate. And how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I am fresh off the road visiting the lovely UK. Although the Scottish people have a lot to say about that. I saw a lot of yes flags, let's put it that way. But had a lovely, lovely time and in that wonderful country. So beautiful. Mm-hmm. Spent some time on the Isle of Skye and come back to a lot of work, but just fantastic. And so nice. So so we have lots to talk about. I know. So because of how full my inbox is.
Right. So,
and by the way, we have I'm celebrating the timing with our drink this evening. I didn't discover, it was discovered for me. It was given to me when I was in Scotland. And I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Are you a fan of Scotch whiskey?
I have been known to imbibe from time to time.
Well, of course. Yes. There is a very small, at this point, very small distillery called the Thompson Brothers.
Oh.
And they are a little bit sort of out there in their marketing and the way that they do things, and it's really just amazing. It was my favorite of all. I've tried a lot of different Scotch whiskeys, but it was amazing. Nice. So we're going to have a dram of the Thompson Brothers whiskey, and it's just absolutely wonderful.
Fantastic, mate. That's fantastic. So that's easy and simple to make, and just pour a little dram. Is it over ice or a little drop of water?
Straight. Yep.
Yeah.
And,
no water, no ice, no
maybe
nothing.
with the little eyedropper of water thing. Maybe just that, but otherwise just straight up. It's just lovely.
Nice. Did you do a lot of distilleries while you're up there?
We did. Yeah.
Nice.
We did. Yeah, we did. For many of them, we did, a whiskey tasting in one of the really nice bars there. And that's the way they serve it to you, of course, is they give you the little eyedropper. It's lovely.
Oh, nice. All right. Anyway, so while we sip on our Thompson Brothers Distillery whiskey, my question for you this week is about I've been writing some of this stuff, and I've had some back and forth both across my newsletter and Tuesday 2 Cents that I write on LinkedIn. And that is about, you and I have discussing politics on LinkedIn and other social media channels. Particularly, I feel that it's a business conversation we should be having on LinkedIn, and maybe be careful about what you say in that environment. Obviously, in other social media channels, have at it. But the pushback there I got was that if we're a little bit controversial, we create connectivity with our audience. You find your people, right? And then I noticed that you've published an article on the Content Marketing Institute's your rose-colored glasses column called "Surprise! Your most controversial content might be your weakest," which I thought was interesting as part of that debate. So let's kick off there. Why do you think controversial content might be your weakest content?
Well, I think what we've run into, and you can see it happening, maybe most pronounced in our country, my country, but really across the world, is that we're now in a place where we reward the controversy, right? So, in other words, you reward outrage. There's division. You simply, I don't care how outlandish your headline, you're never going to outdo Trump in terms of headlines, in terms of controversy. And what is happening is that, and we can actually see it happening, is that people are becoming numb to it, right? They're becoming numb to provocation and clickbait. And so you even see it in the ways that misinformation and disinformation on news media is being squelched, not because necessarily there's less interest in it, but it's because there's a fatigue and a numbness to it now, where it's like, it doesn't matter. The half-life of something provocative is just not that long anymore. And so it's a race to the bottom, really, or the top, or the race to the most provocative, whatever it is. And interestingly enough, it's like that it has been an encouragement for us as marketers to be provocative, to be somewhat controversial, to take a position, to have a point of view. And what I have sort of discovered or seen out there, my observation anyway, is that if you're always shouting, like if you're always constantly provocative, or you're always consistently controversial with the message, basically your messages become background noise. And that is in large part, we can see that actually happening with Trump and with media today, is that it doesn't matter now that the controversy is there. You become background noise, and that the media or content that seems to be, or the brands, I should say, that seem to be actually slicing through that noise are those that have a diversity in when they're quiet, when they're provocative, when they're loud, when they're, it's very much, as a musician, I learned this very early on when I was playing in a band, that the strength of the band wasn't in how your skills in playing, and it wasn't playing as loud as you possibly could. It was always in dynamics, right? The mastering dynamics in music is one of the most important lessons that bands, symphonies, orchestras, learn. And that is about, the difference between being loud and audacious versus quiet and unassuming. And that diversity is what makes each of those things more interesting, and thus gets you through. And so when I was writing the piece, it basically reminded me very much of a speaker at Content Marketing World, actually a couple of years ago, Derek Thompson, who talked about an old principle in product design called Maya. and Maya is most advanced yet acceptable. And the idea is that when you're trying to sell something surprising, you make it familiar. And when you're trying to sell something familiar, you make it surprising. And so you can see that, for example, in the iPhone. iPhone's a great example of it, right? Where every year Apple could completely redesign the iPhone and make it completely different and complete, but they don't purposely, because you want it the most advanced, but you don't want it so advanced that people are like, ick, and turn off of the design, right? That it's, people have sort of a strange reaction when they see something that's completely brand new to them. And so the idea is that in product design, what you want to do is in incrementing products or incrementing anything is like, if it's something surprising, you want to make it feel familiar. And if you want to make it, if you're selling something that is already familiar, you want to make it just a little bit surprising. And so I took that idea and basically said, the interesting thing is that if we apply that to controversy, if you apply that to loudness and controversy, you sort of end up with a sort of a similar kind of couple of spectrums, right? Where you've got sort of the, high level of surprise versus very familiar. And then you've got sort of the consensus opinion, like what's unassuming or sort of boring. And then you've got controversial, which is basically, nobody agrees on anything, sort of at the extremes. And what it gives you is sort of these 4 buckets of content where you can start to balance your content strategy, right? So in the 4 buckets are basically, familiar but consensus, which is boring, right? Basically everybody agrees, and it's old news, right? So the Earth is not flat, right? So if I come out with a blog post saying the Earth is not flat, nobody's going to care.
Yeah.
But however, I might want to do that in business or something like that because it's still useful, but it's just you want to make sure you're covering your bases. It's the classic sort of hub content in the hero hub model of Google.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you've got the surprise but consensus. In other words, everybody's everybody's talking about it, and basically it's a little bit surprising coming from us. The current one right now is AI is going to take everybody's job, right? So, basically this is what, if you leaped onto that messaging, you're leaping on what's kind of called the unearned bandwagon, right? It's like everybody's talking about it right now, but it might be surprising coming from us, and that might be not where you want to be. Yeah. And then in the lower right, of course, you've got familiar but controversial, right? Presidential elections, all that kind of stuff, which is basically popularized polarization. We know where you sit on this. We know where you sit on that. And basically blah, blah, blah. So it's not surprising that Ben and Jerry's, for example, sits in this square very firmly, right? Very liberal, et cetera, et cetera. We know how they're going to feel about things. And then there's the upper right, which is sort of the new world that we live in, which is the surprise and controversial, right? It's like the WTF sort of opinion.
Yeah.
And so the key is that how do you balance that? How do you start to, because no one quadrant is better than the other, but the key is with our content, how do we create dynamics that basically sit in each of those areas so that we actually start to balance our dynamics such that, we have the needed content, we have the stuff, the FAQs, the stuff that we're known for, but we also sprinkle in that surprising or controversy so that we pierce that noise when it's opportunistic, right?
So I thought because you've drawn it out as a quadrant in the blog post, which I think is interesting. And I also think that you and I were going to have a conversation. I was going to ask you about brand distinction as one of our topics on here, and you were like, it's quite close to this, and I can see that now because that's exactly the same with. We're using examples here about the Earth not being flat, AI taking our jobs, and presidential elections. But equally, in the category that we as B2B marketers operate in, there are going to be similar views about different things in our category that may be controversial, but also, as you say, with the hub content, are going to be like, well, everybody says that. This is how a content management system works. Here's the basic benefits of digital asset management. This is what this does, right? So everybody can draw this quadrant for themselves, can't they? And see how edgy they want to get in terms of their opinions and where their brand is.
It's right. It feeds into this. It's this thing that I tell my clients all of the time when it comes to content strategy, because, the question always comes up like, well, how provocative should we be? Or what, should we do this and should we do that? And, that might be a little bit out there. And I give them 2 pieces of advice, which is, one, if you're going to live in any of those surprising quadrants, right? If you're going to live in that consensus surprising or in the controversial surprising, you have to believe it, right? In other words, you have to make sure that not just you, the individual, but you, the institution, the business believes it.
Yeah.
And the second is that, and that's a follow on to the first, which is so go get, socialize that idea, understand that idea, have guidelines and tones and brand issues about the POVs that you want to take, and make sure that the brand believes these things, right? This is the classic Budweiser fail where they came out with campaigns trying to appeal to the LGBTQ community and then got themselves out over their skis and then got called to the carpet by the conservatives for that, and then quickly backed off of it. It was clear that, and they didn't win with anybody, by the way, at that point. Then they lose with the LGBTQ community and they lose with the conservative community because they sort of are wishy-washy on it. Well, it's just clear that what they didn't do was make sure that the brand believed in what they were doing.
Yeah.
So that they would stick up for it. They would basically back and they would say, no, this is what we believe.
Yeah.
And so that gets onto the second, which is the decisions you make are not nearly as important as actually making them. In other words, being conscious of the decisions that you're making is really what the important aspect of this is. So it's not in whether one blog post is this or one social media post is that or one campaign is this versus another campaign is that. It's actually making the conscious decision about what we're actually doing. And so that in and of itself forces you to go back to the first idea, which is, do we believe this? And if before we post something, if we're all looking at each other going, well, what are we going to do to defend this, right? What are we going to do to actually defend this idea? If that's the question that's being asked, it's clear that you haven't gotten, it's clear that you haven't made a decision on it yet. The brand hasn't made a decision on it yet. Because if you're asking how you're going to defend it, you haven't thought it through well enough yet. And you need to think it through.
Yeah, and I think the key word that you used when we were talking about the quadrant at the beginning, you were talking about the top left being unearned bandwagon, right? So I think that process is the way of earning your way into the conversation, because you use the example AI is going to take all of our jobs. Now, unless you have the research that backs that up or it's a relevant position that your organization or you should be taking, you've got no manner. There's no point in you being in that conversation, right? That's what you're talking about, isn't it? Earning your place in that surprise, as it were.
Indeed. It's the when we say consensus, surprising, controversial, etc.
Yeah.
We should keep in mind, it's a great point that you're making, which is we need to keep in mind that it's not us on the consensus. It's not us on the surprise. It's not us on the controversial. It's the audience we want to engage with, right?
Yeah.
In other words, if our audience is going to be surprised, if our audience is going to see this as controversial, if our audience is going to see this as surprising or familiar, that's the question. And so just exactly to your point, when you've got, Starbucks as an example, ran into this in big time. It was a few years ago when they sort of were empowering their baristas, for example, to write on the cups about something about racism or something like that. And they were coming out with all this content about this. Well, they hadn't earned their way into that conversation yet with their audience. Yeah. So it was squarely up in that upper left hand, right? Which is basically an idea of unearned bandwagon, right?
Yeah.
When we think about it. So it's surprise plus consensus. Everybody, in other words, everybody's talking about racism, but it's surprising to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Or surprising to our audience that we would enter the chat. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And if it's going to be, so it's a consensus topic. AI is going to take all of our jobs, racism, systemic, all of the above.
Yeah.
That's a consensus that everybody's talking about. In other words, everybody's there. And then but the problem is that if it's coming from us, it might be completely surprising to that audience because we haven't earned our way into that conversation yet.
Yeah, exactly. And it's always surprise that creates brand fails, isn't it?
Totally. That's exactly right. And it comes back to the Maya principle, right? Which is it's too surprising.
Yeah.
So you want to make it, your balance comes in that sort of Maya principle, which is you want it acceptable. And yet if you're selling something familiar, like the fact that like Starbucks again is a great example here, we're trying to position and have a point of view and sell our brand as one that cares about racism and cares about having this conversation. But what we didn't do is we didn't make it an acceptable way of doing it. We made it too surprising, right? It was too surprising out there to the audience.
Yeah. And that's and as we were discussing before I hit record, the idea that this is so close to sort of brand distinctiveness, and that this sounds like a conversation we should always be having about, as you say, the table stakes and the hub content that we need to create, but also how do we get a little bit further ahead in our skis so that we're distinct, but not go too far that we're shocking and surprising everybody. I think that's a really good point. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, where would people find unsurprising points made by your good self, Rob?
On the Content Marketing Institute site, of course, is where that post is currently.
Yeah.
But otherwise, they would see it in our wonderful little website, which is seventhbear.com.
Nice. And when people spin the dial on the interwebs, where are they going to find you, my friend?
They'll find me mostly on LinkedIn these days.
Nice. And will you be in the bar next week?
Oh, of course I will.
I look forward to it, my friend. I'll see you then. Thank you, Robert. As a listener, I'd love to know what you think. Do you keep your content in the safe zone, or do you like to be a bit provocative? It's a hot topic at the moment. Please drop me an email, ian@rockstarcmo.com. So that's a wrap on our visit to the Rose and Rockstar. Thank you for joining us. You can find links to Robert and me and that article we discussed in the show notes at rockstarcmo.com, where you can also find links to our newsletter, blog, previous episodes, and all the things. Coming up this week on Rockstar CMO FM, on Wednesday, Jeff is back in the studio, and to be honest, we haven't settled on the topic we're going to discuss yet. Robert will be back in the bar on Saturday, and in the meantime, just remember, as Dewey Finn said in the film The School of Rock, you can't just say it, man, you gotta feel it in your blood and guts if you want to rock.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Robbie Samuels hosts the On the Schmooze podcast. Robbie, tell listeners what to expect from the show.
Since 2015, I've interviewed entrepreneurs who overcame challenges to achieve success in their field or industry. Tune in to On the Schmooze to listen as I ask deep questions to elicit untold stories about leadership and networking.
And where can people subscribe?
Find the show at ontheschmooze.com or on marketingpodcast.net, or just search for it wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard them. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.